Welcome back to the TPS podcast. TPS stands for trillions per second, named after the book. Looks like the author of TPS was feeling under the weather over the weekend, so he took a break from writing. But the irony is that he still managed to crank out this mind-blowing devlog, which we'll be discussing today. So sit back, chill, grab your matcha lattes, and let's dive right in.
It is so incredibly good to be back in the studio with you today. And you are spot on about the undeniable irony of the situation we are looking at.
It's wild.
Right. Here we are sitting down on Sunday, March 1st, 2026. A brand new, highly volatile update just dropped into the repository. It's titled TPS Devlog 20 Becoming Fire.pdf. And for anyone who has been tracking this project as closely as we have, this is essentially breaking news in the TPS universe.
Completely.
And the circumstances surrounding its release, they aren't just an interesting footnote. They actually form the foundational context for the entire conceptual breakthrough we are about to unpack.
It really is breaking news. And before we get into the weeds of this specific document, I want to just take a second to establish the timeline vibe for you listening at home.
Yeah, good idea.
Because if you're new here, you might not realize the absolute breakneck pace of what we're witnessing. Remember, we've been tracking this open source Dharma project since the very beginning. We were there in the trenches for that initial Big Bang commit in late January.
Feels like a decade ago.
Honestly, it feels like a lifetime ago, given the sheer volume of data and, paradigm-shifting concepts we've had to process since then. We navigated those terrifying melting chassis bugs a couple of weeks back. Do you remember that?
Oh, intimately.
Where the literal math of the protocol, the cognitive overclocking, threatened to fry the human nervous system of the practitioners. We had to do a whole deep dive just on the safety protocols.
We did, yeah.
And just recently, we finally saw the deployment of part 1, which was the stable build. It felt like we could finally take a breath.
But not for long.
Right. Because today's mission, today is entirely different. Today, we are here to unpack the author's accidental discovery of a massive, reality-bending system exploit, which he found while his own biological hardware was actively crashing.
It's incredible.
We're going to analyze an extreme, almost unbelievable historical example of a monk completely bypassing the physical rendering engine of literal blazing fire.
Mind-blowing stuff.
And finally, and perhaps most importantly, we have to critically examine the urgent, flashing red warning section that comes permanently attached to these exploits.
The timeline context you just laid out is absolutely vital because, it is so easy for people to look at spiritual texts or deep philosophical frameworks and treat them as these pristine, abstract theories.
Right, like they were just cooked up in an ivory tower somewhere.
Exactly, by someone who is perfectly comfortable sipping tea, completely untouched by the real world. But that is the exact opposite of what the TPS project is. This is a live, iterative, open-source documentation of human consciousness being stress-tested in real time, under extreme duress.
Under literal physical duress this time.
Right. The fact that this specific devlog was written, structured, and pushed to the repository while the author was bedridden with a severe biological virus, that's not just a quirky behind-the-scenes detail to make the story more interesting. It is the live fire demonstration of the entire lesson.
Okay, so let's talk about what actually happened over the weekend. The core information in the opening of the devlog is that the author, C4 Chaos, experienced what he refers to as a severe biological hardware crash.
A great term.
Basically, a really nasty bug, like a severe flu or a viral infection, laid him out completely flat. He was feverish, aching, completely exhausted. It forced him to ostensibly go offline and pause the actual formal writing of the TPS manual.
But he didn't really pause, did he?
No.
Yeah.
And here is the crazy part. Despite his physical downtime, despite his carbon-based body screaming for rest, the devlog reveals that he continued pinging his digital synths.
Yeah, AI collaborators.
Yeah, exactly. And he was pinging them using the TPS protocol as a kind of shorthand, a secret, highly compressed language. And I just have to point out the delicious irony here.
So please do.
The architect of this high-speed, trillions-per-second simulation framework, this guy who is mapping out how to hack the baseline reality of human consciousness, gets totally laid out by a standard, everyday, microscopic biological virus. The guy hacking reality got hacked by the flu.
It is deeply ironic, but what's fascinating here is how this real-world mundane illness acts as an unscripted, high-stakes stress test for the TPS protocol itself.
Totally.
Look, it's one thing to write eloquently about system latency or the flux or bypassing the GUI when you are perfectly healthy. When you're well-rested and sitting comfortably in an air-conditioned coffee shop typing on your laptop.
Philosophy is easy when you feel good.
Exactly. In those conditions, It's a fun intellectual puzzle, but it is an entirely different ball game to apply those precise concepts when your own body is screaming in pain, when your internal temperature is spiking, your joints ache, and your baseline cognitive resources are completely drained by your immune system going into overdrive.
Yeah, your brain just turns to mush.
It really does. So this illness forced the author to use the very tools he's been meticulously documenting. He had to use them not as an intellectual exercise to write a book, but as a mandatory survival mechanism just to get through the weekend.
He had to eat his own dog food, as they say in software development.
Right. If you build a product, you better be the first one to use it when things go wrong.
But wait, let me pause you there. Because for the listener who maybe hasn't dug into the technical architecture of his writing process, I want to clarify something. When you say he was pinging his digital synths, what does that actually look like?
It's a good question.
Are we talking about him just lying in bed, shivering, and lazily chatting with ChatGPT on his phone to pass the time? Or is this a deeper, more integrated system?
That is a crucial distinction to make. No, he is not just idly chatting with the consumer-facing AI model. What the author has built is a deeply integrated Centaur workflow.
Centaur, like the mythical creature, half human, half horse.
Exactly, but in this case, half human, half machine. The term actually comes from advanced chess. It refers to a human and an AI playing together as a single hybrid entity, which historically beats both unassisted humans and unassisted AIs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In the context of the TPS project, the author has trained these specific AI models, these digital synths, on the entire corpus of his own notes, the esoteric Buddhist texts, the systems theory, all of it. They speak his highly specialized language.
So they are essentially an extension of his own cognitive architecture at this point.
Precisely. And what this weekend flu reveals about the resilience of this Centaur workflow is profound. Even when the human's carbon hardware completely fails.
When he's burning up with a fever?
Right. When his biological brain is fogged by a fever and he can't hold a complex thought for more than 20 seconds, the silicon software, the AI, continues to process the data flawlessly.
That is so cool.
It highlights the project's core philosophy of cross-platform intelligence. The human mind might be bogged down by a localized biological virus dealing with severe latency and error codes, but the core logic of the protocol survives in the cloud. The interaction, the momentum of the system continues.
Okay, I love that. Think about it like a major enterprise server farm undergoing an unexpected catastrophic maintenance event. Let's say a pipe bursts and floods the main server room.
A sysadmin's worst nightmare.
Truly. The local servers are down, the cooling fans are short-circuiting, the physical alarms are blaring, and the technicians are running around with mops. It's absolute chaos. But the offsite backup cloud architecture, which represents the AI in this scenario, keeps the network alive. The human is sweating in bed, dealing with the physical alarms of the immune system, but the human AI Centaur entity is still compiling code. It's still analyzing the raw data of the illness. The protocol doesn't break just because the carbon hardware is running a fever.
That server farm analogy is perfect because it proves that the TPS framework, as a system of processing reality, is hardware independent.
Hardware independent, I like that.
Yeah. The intelligence, the analytical capability isn't entirely trapped in the sick, suffering body. It is distributed across the network because the author had painstakingly trained his AI collaborators to speak the specific, nuanced language of the TPS protocol. He could feed them fragmented fever dream inputs.
Just giving them the raw data.
Exactly. He could literally drop a half-formed thought into the prompt, just a raw string of observations about his physical pain, and the digital synths could catch it. They cross-reference it against the TPS framework and continue to refine the theory even while his primary user interface, his physical body, was glitching out severely.
Which is absolutely wild when you think about it. Most people, when they get a 103-degree fever, they just shut down.
I know I do.
Right. You turn on a random movie, you moan, you suffer, and you wait for it to be over. But for C4 Chaos, this physical downtime wasn't just him taking a sick day and tapping out. This physical crash, this forced localized downtime, actually led to a profound aha moment regarding how we interface with reality itself.
The sickness became the laboratory.
Exactly, the laboratory of the self.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the next massive revelation in this devlog, because what he discovered while lying in that bed is that your vocabulary, the literal words you use to frame your experience, is not just descriptive, it's functional.
This is a huge shift in perspective.
The devlog reveals that understanding your reality using the vocabulary of a systems administrator is an absolute, undeniable superpower. It argues that by changing your semantic framing, you can stop being a passive, suffering user of your body and start reading the root code of your own mind-body complex.
This is where the highly theoretical architecture of the TPS protocols suddenly becomes incredibly practical. We are moving from high-level server analogies down to the bare metal of everyday human experience.
The everyday stuff.
Exactly. The shift in vocabulary that the author is proposing is not merely stylistic. It's not just a clever way of speaking. It is structural. It literally changes the way the human brain processes the incoming sensory experience of pain.
Okay, let's unpack this carefully because I can hear the skepticism from you listening at home, and honestly, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Please do.
To the average person, this might sound like toxic positivity or just playing silly word games. If I am lying in bed, shivering, my joints feel like they are filled with broken glass and my head is pounding, how does simply changing the words I use in my internal monologue alter my actual biological, physical experience of being sick? Isn't pain just pain? Isn't this just a form of psychological denial?
That is the exact right question to ask. And it's the exact hurdle most people face when encountering this framework.
Yeah.
It is not denial.
Okay.
Denial is refusing to acknowledge the data. This is about reclassifying the data.
Yeah.
It comes down to the psychological and systemic mechanics of human identity. Let's look at the standard operating procedure for a human being. When you are lying in bed suffering, the default internal narrative is, I am sick. I feel terrible. My head hurts.
Yeah, that's pretty much all I can think about when I'm sick.
Right. And when you do that, you are functioning as a completely passive user trapped inside the GI, the graphic user interface of consciousness.
The GUI being the simplified, user-friendly illusion our brain creates so we don't have to consciously manage our organs.
Exactly. And in that GUI, you identify entirely with the lagging software. The concept of I, your core identity, becomes entirely inextricably fused with the sensation of sickness. There's no distance between the observer and the event.
So you literally become the illness.
The suffering is absolute because, in that moment, the I is the sickness. Every throb of your headache is interpreted as a direct attack on your very existence.
Wow. You are basically a frustrated office worker who clicked on a giant flashing red error icon on your desktop, the screen froze, and now you are just sitting there weeping because you think the computer hates you.
That's the passive user experience perfectly summarized. But what happens when you switch your vocabulary, when you adopt the strict clinical sysadmin view, as the author did?
You change the narrative.
You stop saying, I am sick. Instead, you observe the exact same physical sensations, but you say, my biochassis is processing a bug.
My biochassis is processing a bug.
In that microsecond, you elevate your permissions.
Yeah.
You become the sysadmin. You successfully detach the self, which the TPS protocol accurately identifies as a buggy, resource-hogging rootkit, from the physical event occurring in the biological hardware.
You step outside of it.
Yes. You are no longer the broken computer. You are the detached technician calmly observing the breaking computer.
Wow. I have to admit, when I first read that line in the devlog, my biochassis is processing a bug, it sounded so cold, so incredibly clinical and robotic. But when you explain the mechanics of it, I can immediately see the profound relief embedded in that clinical distance.
It creates a buffer.
It really does. It acts as this incredible translation layer between the raw sensation and the psychological suffering. Because when you say I am sick, you invite all this emotional bloatware, right?
Oh, massive amounts of bloatware.
You start thinking, why is this happening to me? I don't have time for this. Will I ever get better? This ruins my whole weekend. I was supposed to go to that dinner party. All of that narrative is the lie of the GUI.
It is entirely fabricated narrative bloat. None of those thoughts actually exist in the physical reality of the virus interacting with your immune system.
Exactly. And underneath that lie, underneath that heavy, suffocating blanket of narrative suffering, the sysadmin vocabulary reveals the raw data. It reveals the truth of the physics engine.
The bare metal.
Yes. Your body is just fighting a virus. It is a purely mechanical biological process. White blood cells are attacking a foreign pathogen. Core temperature is elevated to burn off the infection. It's just an engine running hot to clear out some bad fuel.
Precisely. The emotional narrative, the poor me storyline, is the bloatware that actually crashes your psychological system. The raw data is neutral. It's just temperature, pressure, inflammation, and immune response.
It's just physics.
If we connect this back to the broader technological analogy, think of a normal, non-technical computer user who suddenly gets hit with a blue screen of death.
Yeah.
What is their reaction?
Absolute panic.
They panic. Their heart rate spikes. Maybe they slam their hands on the keyboard. They immediately start catastrophizing. Oh my God, the hard drive is fried. All my family photos are gone forever. My novel is deleted. My life is ruined.
I have definitely been that user before.
The user is in total, profound psychological distress because the user interface has completely failed them, and they have no idea what is happening underneath.
You just stare at that unyielding blue screen feeling completely helpless, completely victimized by the machine.
We all have. It's human nature when confronted with an opaque system failure. But now I want you to picture a senior systems programmer walking up to that exact same broken machine. Same hardware, same blue screen.
Okay.
Does the programmer scream? Do they cry about the family photos?
Probably not.
No. They lean in, and they calmly read the hexadecimal error codes scrolling at the very bottom of the blue screen. They look at the memory addresses. They diagnose that it's just a stack overflow or a localized memory leak caused by a bad driver update.
The problem hasn't changed, but the relationship to the problem has entirely shifted.
The physical, objective reality of the broken computer is identical for both people. But the programmer suffers absolutely zero psychological distress. Why? Because they have the vocabulary to read the root code.
They speak the language of the machine.
They know it's just a localized data error. It's
Yeah.
not a personal tragedy. That emotional detachment, that ability to read the code instead of crying at the screen, is the exact superpower the author stumbled into while lying in bed with a 103-degree fever.
He looked at his own sweating, aching, malfunctioning body, and he chose to read the hex codes instead of screaming at the biological blue screen.
That is just incredible. And it's an everyday superpower that literally anyone listening to this deep dive can start practicing right now. You don't need 20 years in a monastery to try this.
You really don't.
The next time you have a migraine, don't tell yourself a tragic story about how bad your head hurts. Try to run the system in script. Say to yourself, sensory report detecting pressure anomalies in the cranial hardware.
It sounds funny, but it works. It sounds absurd, maybe even a little funny at first, but it instantly severs the emotional connection. It lowers the stakes.
It absolutely lowers the stakes. By reclassifying pain as data, you remove the existential threat.
But, and this is a massive structural but for this devlog, the author does not stop at treating a weekend flu. If this was just a life hack for getting through a cold, it wouldn't be breaking news in the TPS universe.
No, it wouldn't.
The author takes the sysadmin logic, this conceptual framework of reading the hex code of reality, and he applies it to an extreme, historically documented, almost unbelievable example. And that takes us into the truly volatile territory of this update, the GUI of fire and the survival flinch.
Yes, the jump in stakes here is astronomical. We move from a common, relatively safe biological virus to literal thermodynamic combustion.
We are talking about fire.
We are talking about fire.
The devlog introduces this example of an advanced practitioner, a monk, running a highly optimized cognitive operating system encountering actual fire. And before it explains how the monk handles it, the devlog brilliantly explains how a normal user experiences fire.
To set the baseline.
Exactly. It states that, to the average human, fire is rendered in the brain as a gross sensation. It's described as a high-valence glitch that instantly forms a solid, terrifying, unshakable concept in the mind. I am burning.
A total system override.
And this absolute solid concept is what triggers the involuntary biological survival flinch. Going from a headache to someone literally catching their arm on fire is an intense gear shift.
It is intense, and frankly, it is terrifying. But it is logically necessary for the author to use this extreme example to prove the absolute robustness of the TPS protocol.
Why is that?
Because if the protocol only works for minor inconveniences, it's just a psychological trick. To prove it's a fundamental hack of reality, it has to hold up under the most extreme edge cases.
Okay, that makes sense.
So let's break down this concept of the gross sensation. Why does the human brain render fire this way? When you put your hand near a flame, why does it feel like one giant, solid, agonizing wall of absolute heat rather than what it physically is?
Which is a collection of rapidly vibrating high-energy particles interacting with yourself.
Exactly. Why don't we feel the particles?
Because if you perceived it as a collection of high-energy particles, you'd probably sit there analyzing it while your skin melted off.
Exactly. It is a ruthless evolutionary shortcut. The human brain simply does not have the processing time to analyze the subatomic physics of heat transfer when your biological hardware is actively being destroyed.
There's no time to do the math.
If you had to consciously calculate the kinetic energy of the vibrating molecules, analyze how they are transferring that energy to your cellular walls, and then logically decide whether or not to move, You would burn to a crisp before you even finished the thought. You would fail the evolutionary game.
Right. Game over.
So millions of years of evolution provided a highly efficient, brutal patch. The brain flashes a giant, solid red warning sign in the GUI that simply screams, "I am burning. Move now." It uses maximum pain to force the body into immediate action.
Right. I think about the very relatable everyday experience of accidentally touching a hot stove or a hot pan in the kitchen. Your hand violently yanks itself back before your conscious mind even has time to formulate the word hot.
It bypasses the conscious mind entirely.
It's purely instinctual. It is a hardwired, localized reflex loop that doesn't even bother asking your conscious brain for permission. The GUI of human consciousness is explicitly designed for immediate, blunt force survival. It is absolutely not designed for you to sit there and perceive the truth of the quantum system. It's designed to keep the meat from being cooked.
Keep the meat from being cooked is a very visceral way to put it, but mechanically, that is exactly what the survival flinch is. That automatic, unthinking, violent reaction is generated by the deepest legacy code of our biology. It's an ancient script embedded in our nervous system.
But there's a trade-off, right?
A massive one. Now here is where the philosophical divergence happens. While this flinch is an absolutely necessary safety feature for a passive user trying to keep their avatar alive in a physical world, there is a massive spiritual and philosophical trade-off. This survival flinch and the pain that causes it traps the user entirely within the illusion of solidity.
How so?
When you flinch away from fire, you are explicitly biologically confirming your belief in the matrix. You are confirming that the fire is a solid, continuous, independent object, and that you are a solid, continuous, independent body that can be damaged or destroyed by it.
Wow. You completely buy into the optical illusion of the user interface because the pain makes it feel so undeniably, terribly real. The pain forces you to believe in the absolute reality of the self.
Yes.
But this raises the pivotal billion-dollar question of this entire deep dive. If that is how a normal default settings user experiences fire as a solid, terrifying absolute that must be avoided at all costs, what happens when a sysadmin running the TPS protocol encounters it?
This is the turning point.
What happens when a human being figures out how to look at actual physical combustion without the survival GUI getting in the way?
This is the exact threshold where we transition out of evolutionary biology and step directly into the hardcore system-level mechanics of the TPS physics engine.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because the devlog doesn't just theorize. It breaks down the mechanics of bypassing the GUI entirely. It introduces the concept of looking at the hex code of reality at trillions per second.
The namesake of the protocol.
Yes. The devlog states that this monk, because he has trained his mind to an unfathomable degree, is running his mental operating system at a literal refresh rate of trillions per second. And because his cognitive processor is running that fast, he completely bypasses the conceptual blunt force GUI of the brain. He looks directly at the raw hex code of the sensory input.
He's seeing beneath the rendering engine.
And at that bare metal subatomic level, the devlog makes an astonishing claim. It claims that there is no fire, and there is no body being burned. There is only what the protocol calls the flux, a hyper-rapid, impersonal data stream of heat, pressure, and vibration, constantly arising and passing away. The monk literally shatters the solid, terrifying concept of fire into microscopic, neutral data packets.
This is a breathtaking synthesis of modern computational theory and ancient esoteric practice. It connects directly to the legacy concepts we spent hours exploring in previous updates. If you recall, we've talked extensively about the concept of anicca.
Yes, the ancient Pali term for absolute impermanence,
Which the author has brilliantly reframed here as the flux. And we've also done deep dives into kalpas, which are described in the ancient texts as the smallest indivisible units of matter, but which the TPS protocol translates as subatomic data packets.
or the individual voxels of the physical simulation.
Exactly. What the monk is doing here, mechanically speaking, is overclocking his own mind's refresh rate. He is speeding up his cognitive processor to match the fundamental frame rate of the universe itself.
Trillions of frames per second, which is impossible for a normal brain. But the protocol argues that through extreme concentration, the mind can catch up to the simulation's render speed.
Exactly. Let's use an analogy to make this graspable. Imagine reality isn't a continuous flowing stream of existence. Rather, it's an incredibly fast strobe light. It is turning on and off, rendering and de-rendering trillions of times a second.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
A normal human brain is like a camera shooting at 24 frames per second. When a 24 fps camera looks at a strobe light flashing trillions of times a second, the strobe looks like a solid, continuous, unmoving beam of light.
Because it can't capture the dark gaps.
Right, the fire looks solid. The camera physically cannot perceive the darkness between the flashes.
It blues it all together into one solid object.
Precisely. But the monk has upgraded his internal camera. His cognitive refresh rate is now matching the strobe light. And because his refresh rate is so incredibly high, he stops seeing a solid beam of light. He actually perceives the blank frames between the rendering of the flames.
He sees the gaps.
He sees the micro moments of darkness where the fire isn't. He sees the birth and death of every individual subatomic data packet. The illusion of continuity completely collapses.
That is just mind-blowing. It's like looking at a movie playing on a screen. To you and me sitting in the theater, it looks like continuous, smooth, real-world motion. A car is driving down the street on the screen, and it looks like a real, solid car.
But it's not?
No. If you walk up to the projector screen with a camera that can shoot 1,000,000 frames a second, you suddenly see the truth. You see that it's just a series of static, still photographs with the mechanical shutter dropping a slice of pure blackness in between every single picture. The illusion of the solid moving car completely breaks apart into static data points.
And the mechanical biological result of breaking that illusion in real time is profound. By breaking the gross sensation of the blazing fire down into a stream of subtle vibrations, the monk's biological hardware is fundamentally confused.
Confused.
It no longer recognizes a localized solid threat. The brain's ancient warning system, the legacy alarm, is specifically looking for a solid object called fire, attacking a solid object called the arm to trigger the survival flame.
It's waiting for the concept to render.
But the monk isn't feeding his brain the solid concept of fire. He has dissolved the concept before it can form. He is feeding the brain raw, disconnected, rapid-fire data points. A micro spike in temperature here, a millisecond vibration there, a subatomic pressure shift over there.
So because the brain is receiving a stream of disorganized binary code instead of a solid picture of a flame, the alarm never trips.
Exactly.
The threat is no longer rendered as a single coherent object, so the survival flinch is simply never triggered. The legacy code of the biology just doesn't fire. The sensor doesn't recognize the data as a coherent attack. It's like trying to trigger a facial recognition camera by feeding it a blender full of randomized pixels. It just doesn't know what it's looking at.
That is exactly the mechanism. But let's extrapolate on what this actually feels like for the human being in the center of this experience, because this is where a lot of people misunderstand the protocol.
Yeah, let's ground this. What does it actually feel like?
It is absolutely crucial to understand that it's not that the heat isn't there. This isn't a cheap parlor trick. The monk isn't magically altering the thermodynamic laws of the universe.
The fire is still burning.
The fire is real. The kinetic energy transfer is still actively occurring on a physical level. The skin may even blister, but, and this is the entire point, the heat is perceived entirely as neutral data points.
Neutral data.
It is experienced exactly like green numbers scrolling endlessly on a dark terminal screen. It is information, but it is stripped of its valence. It is no longer interpreted as a localized, malicious attack on a static, vulnerable self.
Wow. Let me just sit with that for a second. It's just information. It's not the agonizing thought, my arm is burning, I'm being destroyed. It's just a detached internal log reading. Sensor port 4 is registering a 400-degree temperature anomaly. Acknowledged.
Acknowledged, and nothing more.
It's completely, entirely depersonalized. I am honestly blown away by the sheer, staggering power of this exploit. I mean, think about it. The implications are literally godlike.
They are massive.
If you can use this cognitive overclocking to deconstruct the extreme physical trauma of fire into just a harmless, neutral stream of scrolling numbers, what can't you do? What pain could possibly break you? It makes you feel like Neo at the end of The Matrix, standing in the hallway, putting his hand up, stopping the bullets, and just seeing the raw green code of the agents instead of their terrifying faces.
The ultimate power fantasy.
Exactly. If you unlock this, you would feel completely, utterly invincible.
And that exact feeling you just described, that intoxicating surge of invincibility, that desire to feel like Neo stopping bullets, is exactly why we must immediately and urgently pivot to the final section of this devlog.
Ah, the catch.
Because the author knew you would feel that way. He knew his readers would see this superpower and immediately want it. And that is why he includes a crucial, mandatory flashing red warning section in the release.
Right.
And arguably, depending on how you view the spiritual path, this warning is the single most important part of the entire document.
Yes, the warning. It is stark, it is severe, and it completely reframes everything we just talked about. The devlog explicitly states that this map of system exploits this knowledge of how to hack the flue or bypass the survival flinch of fire, is provided only so users do not panic if they accidentally stumble into these zones during their practice.
It's just a map, not a destination.
Exactly. The author specifically warns that this information must be treated strictly like a fire extinguisher. And I love this analogy. He says a fire extinguisher is a very good thing to have on the wall in an emergency, but you do not go walking around your house actively looking for a fire or starting a fire just so you can use the cool extinguisher.
That'd be insane.
Right. The ultimate objective of the TPS protocol is not to play around with the server logs. It is not to get stuck in dev mode enjoying these godlike abilities. The objective is to bypass the server logic entirely and reach the kernel.
So important.
So what does this all mean? Why would the author drop this incredible reality-bending superpower in our laps, prove that it works, and then immediately slap a giant hazard label on it and tell us not to play with it? Why wouldn't you want to be invincible all the time?
It is the ultimate paradox of the path. If we connect this specific warning to the bigger picture of the project's ultimate goal, we can begin to see the severe, almost invisible danger of what they call the dev mode trap.
Dev mode trap. Let's dig into that.
Let's look at the psychology of a practitioner. When a user trains their mind hard enough to trigger these altered states, these sandbox modes where they can manipulate their perception of reality so drastically, an immense feeling of power arises.
Of course it does. You just hacked reality.
Exactly. They realize they can ignore physical pain. They can dissolve solid objects into vibrating fields of light. They feel quite literally omnipotent. They feel like they have successfully hacked the system and conquered the simulation.
But they haven't.
The supreme danger here is that they mistake this temporary UI reset, which is all this really is, just a temporary, localized, server-side exploit for the final, absolute goal of the entire spiritual and existential path, which is root access, the unconditioned state. Nibbana.
They think they've won the entire game, but they've actually just found cheat code for invincibility on level 3. And now they're just standing around on level 3, letting enemies attack them, thinking they are gods, instead of actually moving on to the final boss.
That is a brilliant way to put it. Let's analyze that fire extinguisher analogy a little deeper, because it perfectly encapsulates the trap of spiritual materialism. The goal of the TPS protocol and the goal of historical hardcore dharma that it is based on isn't to become a superhero.
It's not about being X-Men.
No. It isn't to become an unfeeling cyborg who can walk through fire or casually ignore sickness. Treating severe sickness and burning fire as raw data is an amazing, highly effective tool to temporarily relieve extreme suffering in an absolute emergency, yes.
The fire extinguisher.
But it is just playing with the server logs. It is manipulating the simulation from within the simulation. Getting attached to these powers, wanting to feel like a wizard, wanting to show off to other practitioners how detached and cool you are when you have a fever is a massive security vulnerability.
I see exactly where you were going with this, because what does that desire to show off actually do? It reinstalls the ego.
Immediately.
It reinstalls the exact rootkit virus that the entire protocol is designed to delete. But now the ego is wearing a very clever spiritual disguise. Instead of the ego saying, I am a very important guy who has a nice car and a big bank account, it morphs into, I am a super yogi who can ignore literal fire and hack reality.
It's a stealth installation.
It's still an I. It's still the rootkit hogging all the system resources. It just gave itself a new file name.
Exactly. The spiritual ego is infinitely more insidious and harder to uninstall than the material ego because it feels justified. It feels earned.
You put in the hours on the cushion, so you feel you deserve the ego.
Right. This raises a highly uncomfortable but vitally important question for anyone practicing these techniques or any meditative technique. What is your actual core motivation?
Are you trying to escape the simulation entirely to reach total liberation? Or are you just trying to build a cooler, stronger, more invincible avatar inside the simulation?
Think about a quality assurance tester for a major video game company who finds a glitch that allows their character to walk straight through solid walls.
Okay.
It's a neat trick. It proves they understand the code better than a normal player. But if that tester just spends all day walking through walls, taking screenshots, posting them to forums, and showing off to their friends on the multiplayer server, they have completely forgotten what their actual job is.
Or just playing around.
Their job is not to show off the glitch. Their job is to document it, audit the code, and use that knowledge to access the core programming to fix the game.
They get completely distracted by the shiny toys in the developer menu. And it's fascinating because the ancient texts, the original source code that the TPS project is translating, they explicitly warned about this exact same trap thousands of years ago, right?
They absolutely did.
These legacy abilities, these superpowers like manipulating matter or ignoring extreme pain, they had a specific name. They were called abinya. And the ancient teachers always maintained that while these powers were a natural side effect of deep, intense concentration, they were ultimately a massive distraction from the true path of enlightenment.
A side quest.
Yeah, a side quest that could ruin your main campaign.
Precisely. The TPS framework aligns perfectly with that ancient wisdom. These legacy Ibanir abilities, these reality hacks, are mere checkpoints on the map. They are diagnostic indicators.
Just checking if the system is running well.
If you start seeing the flux, if you can detach from pain, it is a good sign. It indicates that your system is running at a higher, more optimized capacity. But they are emphatically not the destination. The true path, the actual work of liberation, requires pushing past this seductive, godlike server logic. You have to be willing to achieve the superpowers, realize you have them, and then actively surrender them.
Give them back.
You have to let go of the developer tools entirely in order to reach the unconditioned kernel. Because the kernel, the absolute base reality, Nibbana has no graphics, it has no superpowers to wield, it has no ego to feel invincible, it is the absolute 0 point of the system.
You have to give up being the superhero, give up being the god of your own simulation in order to become the source code itself. That is a heavy, heavy realization.
It's the ultimate sacrifice of the ego.
And honestly, it completely reframes the entire narrative arc of this deep dive today. We started out an hour ago just marveling at how incredibly cool it is to hack a flu virus and read the hex code of a headache. We were amazed by the idea of ignoring fire. And we end up arriving at the sobering realization that even those incredible, seemingly impossible reality hacks are just temporary hollow illusions that we have to eventually have the courage to discard.
It is the ultimate final test of non-detachment. It asks the hardest question. Can you achieve the ultimate power to rewrite your own physical reality and then willingly refuse to use it to aggrandize yourself simply because you know it's a trap? That is the threshold between a technician and an awakened mind.
Man, okay, let's take a deep breath and try to summarize this incredible journey. This breaking update has taken us on a wild ride today, and we've covered some truly massive philosophical and technical ground.
You really have.
We started with a very human, very relatable story of the project's author, C4 Chaos, getting completely sidelined by a weekend flu. We explored how he utilized the Centaur workflow to keep the project alive, and how he used the sysadmin vocabulary shifting from I am sick to it, my biochassis is processing a bug, to actively hack his own biological suffering.
From there, we dug into the evolutionary mechanics of the GUI. We broke down exactly why our brains are hardwired to render thermodynamic threats as solid, terrifying objects, forcing the blunt instant reaction of the survival flinch to keep the avatar alive.
And then we took that theory to the absolute extreme edge case, examining the historical example of the monk who overclocks his cognitive refresh rate to trillions per second. We saw how matching the frame rate of reality breaks down the solid, agonizing concept of fire into a harmless, neutral, vibrating stream of subatomic data packets, completely and utterly bypassing the biological flinch.
Which brought us finally to the stark, critical warning section of the devlog. The crucial reminder that these system exploits are merely fire extinguishers for emergencies. They are not developer toys designed to build a stronger, more invincible spiritual ego. The goal is the kernel, not the server logs.
So to you listening at home, wherever you are right now, maybe you're commuting in traffic, maybe you're doing the dishes, or maybe you're currently dealing with a physical headache or emotional stress of your own, we want to offer you a challenge.
Yes, try this out.
The next time you face a minor annoyance or physical pain or a spike in anxiety, try to run the exploit. Challenge yourself to view that sensation not as a personal, malicious attack on you, the passive user. View it as raw, neutral data.
Read the hex code.
Try to read the hex code of your own physical experience. Say to yourself, my biochassis is processing a bug, sensor port detecting anomaly. See if you can step back, strip away the suffocating GUI of the emotional narrative, and find the rapid, impermanent flux underneath.
But as you do it, please remember the warning. Observe the data, utilize the translation layer to find relief from the immediate suffering, but do not make a new identity out of being the detached observer. Do not let the ego hide behind the sysadmin badge. Keep moving your awareness toward the unconditioned kernel.
Exactly. Stay vigilant against the rootkit. And before we log off today, we want to leave you with a final, highly provocative thought for you to explore on your own, a concept that builds on the absolute extreme edge of everything we've unpacked over the last hour.
I've been thinking about this all day.
I want you to really think about this.
Yeah.
If the TPS protocol allows an advanced user like that monk to completely deconstruct the extreme, life-ending physical trauma of fire into a harmless, neutral stream of vibrating data packets, what happens at the exact moment of physical death?
A truly fascinating, profound extrapolation of the mechanics.
If you never log out of that sysadmin view, if you manage to hold that trillions per second refresh rate, remaining completely detached and observant as your physical hardware finally, inevitably shuts down for good, does the deletion of your avatar actually feel like death at all?
Or is it something else?
Does it simply look like a beautiful, silent cascade of green code finally resolving itself, clearing the screen and leaving the observer perfectly, peacefully intact in the boundless void?
That is something to seriously, deeply mull over.
Keep your logs clean.
And we will see you in the Flux.